through the hop-in?
Is your audio as well? Or no? Ah, gotcha.
Like this. This is how I'll be talking.
Ah,
You can hear me through the hop-in stuff, right?
hold up. I can't tell which ones.
Think so, yeah.
Oh yeah, I can see the little. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll mute it. All right.
Yeah. If you do need to communicate with me, I recommend through Zoom is the best or chat because the way my headset is set up, it's a little bit duct tape is the best way to put it.
I felt that. Okay. All right.
All right.
Yeah, I
Thank you
have
very
the
much.
others. Okay.
Okay. Doing one last audio test. Good, good.
Okay. Ooh. Hold up, real quick.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this really late night workshop. We're going to give 2, 3 minutes to let people trickle in before I begin. For the meantime, I will give a warning due to the nature of the workshop being an hour long, the pace will be a little bit fast. So if you guys haven't already, I recommend you have these keyboard shortcuts on another tab just in case you need them. Especially since the shortcuts I'll be using will be for a Windows computer, and I do not have the Mac ones memorized. So that will be useful for any Mac users with Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to give a few more minutes to let people trickle in like little waves. If you don't have the link on the chat, it's also on the hacker guide. I recommend you keep it bookmarked as well, since it does have a few useful shortcuts that I didn't even know they existed. Give it one more minute. You'll get that answer soon enough. All right, I think we've got enough people trickling in. So for today's workshop, I'll be covering the topic of vector art with, specifically enough, Adobe Illustrator. While the things that I'll be covering focuses on the program Adobe Illustrator, it doesn't mean you can't do this with any other program. It's just the way you do it will be a little bit different. That's it. The ideas will stay the same though. So to start with, let me introduce myself. I am Shana Sitz. I work as a software engineer on JP Morgan, but I also used to be the previous marketing director for Upsilon Pi Epsilon for about 4 years, and I also did some designs for the previous ShellHacks as working with the Alumni Association for today. As you can tell, I do have a background in design, and I do like it as it helps me a lot with a lot of my software engineering duties. So for our agenda today, wait, does this work? Oh, okay, thanks. For our agenda today, I will be covering the concepts of vector art, including what it is and what is it used for. We'll do a quick vector art tutorial as well as a Q&A afterwards if there is enough time. As mentioned earlier, I did send the Adobe Illustrator shortcuts. The one I'll be using is I'll be using Windows for my designs, doing it with a mouse and through Adobe Illustrator's default settings. This is what we'll be creating today. We'll just be creating a quick, fun logo and some icons. If we can get through all three, that'd be swell. So on the topic of art, even though it says vector art, you don't necessarily need to know art to do it. You don't really need to know how to draw. It does help. I'm not going to lie that the concepts of art will help you in creating something nice, but it's not a requirement. So let's start with what is a vector. Vectors are graphics created using mathematical formulas, which allow them to scale because they're using a formula. You know how a quadratic, the little graph, you can make that U bigger and it'll stay the same shape, but just be wider in terms of range? That kind of concept is what's used to make a vector. Because of their ability to scale, they're commonly used for illustrations. So as you can see there, logos and icons. Because of the nature of a vector, you can't necessarily just draw a vector on Microsoft Paint. That's not going to work. You're going to need some specific tools and a specific file format to save it as. The tools you should be keeping an eye out for is whether or not they can do the pen/path tool. And in terms of which file format, it's SVG. I'll explain more about that later. In terms of which programs can do vectors, obviously everyone knows Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, but if you're looking for a free alternative, I've seen Inkscape be used quite a bit, and other alternatives I've seen used be thrown around is Gravit Designer, Vector, Affinity Designer, and Corel Draw. So let's say you can't afford Adobe Illustrator, the concepts I'll be teaching you can be used for the other programs as well. So what makes an SVG so important in making a vector? The thing about an SVG is that it saves that mathematical formula. It saves the vector itself. It's a vector saving. JPEG, JPGs, and PNGs save images as a raster. And what that means is a raster basically gives it a few artifacts that you can see when you zoom in. If you're trying to save something as a PNG or a JPG, you want to make sure that you have the image large enough so that these artifacts don't appear when you zoom in as much. So let's say you have to build a vector through Illustrator and you cannot save it as an SVG. Only the program, the design you're doing only accepts PNG and JPGs. Then I recommend you saving it as you build the vector as big as possible, then you scale down because you lose less details when you scale down compared to scaling up. So let us begin the tutorial. Alrighty, so I will open up my Illustrator program. I have it preloaded because I don't want you guys to wait 5 minutes for this to load. And the first thing we're going to do is we're landed in the Illustrator homepage. As mentioned earlier, my settings are Windows PC. I'm using a mouse and I'm doing Adobe Illustrator. You can do vector art with tablets if you like that. But for me, I only have a mouse. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new program. If you want to open it, you can also click on the open button. But for now, we're just doing creation. So click on the create new. I'm just going to quickly explain some of the functionality. When you create a new document, Adobe Illustrator is very nice enough to save you what files you have recently, as well as what kind of templates you have saved, as well as any other template if you're doing a mobile design, a web design, or something for print, for example. When you click on an option, you're given with the preset name that you can set and save later on, the width, which can be done through pixels, inches, and a bunch of other things. Most of the times we'll be working with pixels. You might see points be used, which is the Adobe's specific system. And inches and the others are dependent on whether you're going to actually print something out. This is the orientation. So would you like your picture to be landscape or vertical? And you can change that later on. Artboards, which I'll explain later, the width, the height. Bleed is, think of them as margin. So when you build something for, like, for example, print works, you have to be careful that it doesn't reach the edge of the page because it might be cut off. Color mode represents whether it's done in RGB or CMYK. I covered it briefly on the design, but TLDR, you want RGB for digital works, CMYK for printed works. They also have it preset in the web and print sections. As you can see here, it changes. If you want to use those instead, or if the functionality doesn't want to work with you. And then finally, we've got the raster effect, which is basically how much detail do you want? The higher the raster effect, the more detail, it looks better, but it's also going to be a heavier file. The lower it is, the faster it'll save. So for this project, we'll keep our width at 700 and our height as 300. We can change it later on if we'd like. And click save. And here we are. We are at the artboard. The artboard represents the area that you're working on. If you want, you can create more artboards by clicking on the artboard button right here, which lets you resize, rename, and drag them. Artboards are useful when you're trying to design multiple things at once, or you're trying to do a set of things, because then each one can be saved individually when you choose the save option. For our case, though, we'll just keep it at one simple artboard. You can think of an artboard as a canvas in a sense. The first thing I'm going to teach you guys is how to move around the screen. So if you hold space and left mouse button, you can drag the screen and move it around as you'd like. Make it more up, make it more down, etc. You can also use the hand icon right here. If you want to zoom in, I recommend you hold the Control, Alt, and the mouse wheel, which lets you zoom out and zoom in through that. If not, you can also click on that button to alter your zoom settings. What I like to do is do it on the pointer because immediately after zooming in or out or moving, you want to drag the object usually. So before we even begin with the design, I'm going to explain to you a few functionalities of Illustrator. The first thing is the toolbar at the top, which gives you all your options for the document as well as the object you're working with. TLDR files for file settings like new, save, close, edit, etc. Edit is for the document itself. You're trying to manipulate it, so copy, paste. You can also change the color settings, profiles, preferences, shortcuts, etc. Object is for the object that you've selected, so you can flip it around, change the path, change the shape, do some grouping, lock it, etc. Type is for the font. Select is for your selection. Selection being whatever you have active at the time. Effect is for any special effects. So let's say you want to do some painting effect, or you want to add some glow, or maybe make the edges rounded, you'd go here. View is for how you're seeing the screen. Windows are for basically your workout, so layout. So for example, you can have some things like actions appear and drag it over here. And these things are how you customize your workspace to what you like. I use the default settings, but sometimes people like to move these options around. And then help is for help. It's self-explanatory. So in terms of the right, we have the tool options. So properties here, we can go through various properties. The default usually has things like swatches out, which are the colors that you have saved, brushes, gradient, stroke. There's things like appearance, which is useful for when you're making text, art, pathfinder, and alignment, or just to name a few. It also has the layer options right here, which you can manipulate directly the objects, moving it up and down, locking it, or hiding it. And then we finally have the left toolbar, which can be a floating, like I have it, or you have it locked to the side right here. I like it floating, so then I can move it around everywhere, but it really depends what you guys want. That's where your tools lie. We'll go through all the tools later. So now that I've taught you how to move to zoom, I'll also teach you how to save. You can click on the save button right here and it'll save your project. Adobe does have files stored. So if for some chance, don't rely on this, but if for some chance your Adobe program crashes, it might have it saved for you. So, always have that safety net there. So for starters, let's start by making that graphic fun logo that I've demonstrated earlier. To do that, I'm going to use the text, which is marked by this T, and make a layout right here. When you make a text through Adobe Illustrator, it populates it with lorem ipsum first. It populates with lorem ipsum first. And what we're going to do now with this lorem ipsum is delete it, because we're not going to need the lorem ipsum. You're going to type in graphic fun. Feel free to type in any other things you want, but for now we're going to do graphic fun. And there's quite a lot of space, as you notice. Our graphic fun is not going to take this much space. So what you can do is you can either move the text box yourself, alternate with the text tool, or you can click here and double click this little icon right here. By doing that, you change it to point mode, which helps change the text box size and also helps you resize. So for example, right now I think I have it on point mode instead of area type, which what it does is it lets me resize this as if it was a shape itself, like a picture. So I don't have to deal with font sizing and stuff. But if you want to mess around with font sizes, you can always just click back on this box here, little dot, and it'll be back to area mode. As I resize, notice how it doesn't actually change as I resize the box right here. Instead, what you can do is you can change the font by using this option right here. A few other notable font things are the color, the stroke right here, stroke opacity, font type, which font style, the font size, the alignment, among other things. If you go to one of your properties as well, I believe this one's appearance right here, character, you can check the character settings, which we can manipulate the line spacing in between it, as well as a few other details. Paragraph is for if you have the lorem ipsum long wall of text, and open type is mainly for the font itself. So we're going to keep it, go back here, back, go here, stretch it to a decent size. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change the font. So let's change it to something that most people should have on their system, I think. We'll go for Harl Solid Italic right here. Just a little personality to our font. And then what we're going to do with our font is we're going to create outlines. So what create outlines does is it converts your font into a shape. And the reason why we're doing this, let me Control Z, undo, is because if I want to apply a gradient to my font, it's going to turn black unless I convert it to a shape or I do some bypass using the appearance settings right here. The reason it does that is because our font is not actually a shape, but rather a text element. And the way Adobe Illustrator treats these are quite different from a shape. To make it easier, I like to convert it to an outline so I just don't have to deal with that hassle. if I make a mistake while it's in an outline, then I just Control-C before creating an outline and make it a duplicate like this, opening up my layers and hiding the duplicate. That's my personal preference, but there's different ways to go about this. That's the fun thing about design in general. There's not one way to solve a problem. So I'm going to click on this and then convert it to right click. By the way, it's right click to do create outlines. I realized I skipped that step. And then now it's an outline. What I'm going to do is apply a gradient to it. But I don't like this color. I want to apply it to the color that I had in the demonstration. So to do that, I shall click on this white. It was, let's see, dark purple. So I think it's this kind of purple. Give it that night vibe. And then at the end, I'm going to add a dark neon pink. This is not that bright. But wait a second. It doesn't only have a pink. It has another color. How do I add another color inside? Well, you just have to click the gradient scale to just pop it. You see the little plus there. And there you go. You could mess with like how the blending works. So put it more closer to make the shape seem more solid, put it more further. Or you could just do it through the location properties here. When you move things around, like when you move the dots around, it also changes those properties. Anyways, I'll click on this and make it a dark red per se, something like this. Maybe like this. Let's go for this. Make this a little bit more closer. So we have a nicer blend of colors. Do note that if you don't like a color, like let's say I accidentally create one, you can click on the trash can to delete that stop. There's also other gradient modes as well, like radial and freeform. Freeform has been pretty popular recently, as well as the angle of the gradient that you can work with, but that's for a later date. Now that we've created our gradient, I realized, wait a second, the gradient doesn't actually flow that uniformly. It just kind of stops and goes to the next one. That's because each letter is considered an individual shape. So what we're going to have to do is make sure that Adobe Illustrator reads this all as the same shape by creating a compound path. So what we're going to do is ungroup this. And now that you've ungrouped it, you can see that it has all the components here. I'm going to click and drag the entire shape. Then right click again. And then when you make it into an outline, it does create a compound path, but it's not the way we want it to be. So we're going to release it. And it's going to look weird, but we're going to right click again and then make a compound path. Voila, it now has a uniform shape to it. We're going to drag this up and then put it in the center so it looks nice. And that's it. Your quick and simple gradient logo completed. And we've done that pretty quickly. So the next thing I'm going to cover is the background. The background as in the shape that covers the back. So to do that, you're going to click on this shape right here. It usually is a rectangle. For some reason, mine is defaulted to a circle, but we'll just right click and click on the rectangle tool. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Shift and click and drag. The reason why I hold Shift is to make it uniform in a sense that it's a square. So if you want to make square documentations, hold Shift. If you release your Shift, you notice how you can stretch the shape. It doesn't feel uniform. I just do it by habit sometimes. But anyways, for a rectangle, we don't need that uniformity. So we're just going to click and drag. And then it seems to be a little bit misaligned. So we're just going to click and drag here. All right, we've got it. But our rectangle is the gradient color. That's not right. Let's change it. We wanted a solid color. So you can click on this right here. If you click on this, that removes the color. So be careful. Click on the color button, and then you can double click the swatch right here to change the color of the element you're doing. So for us, we'll probably go for more pastel, closer to the red shade. And we'll have a rectangle. But here's the issue. Our rectangle is now covering our picture. What do we do? The reason why it's covering our picture is because the order of the picture, the rectangle is actually in the front, our picture's in the back. You can tell through the layer tab right here. If you actually drag the rectangle down, you see our picture come out. So the more closer to the top it is, the more up front the element is. There is a shortcut to do this. One shortcut is to right click, and then I believe it was in arrange. You can bring it to the front, which just brings it to the front, like the very top, bring it to the back, all the way to the very back, one step at a time. Or the other shortcut is to do Control Shift bracket. So I think left bracket is to go all the way to the back, right bracket is to go all the way to the front. Thus, you can have fun with that. So I'll put it all the way to the back. Then now that we've recolored it and we sent it to the back, we kind of don't want this to interfere while we're designing. Because let's say I'm trying to move some letter, I might accidentally click on the rectangle, move it. Oh God, I don't want to do that. So what I do is I lock it by clicking on the lock right here. You could also hide it if you think that the pink is so ugly, but it's what you by clicking on the eye right here, but it's up to you. And as well as making it in new layers to help organize your work. A tip that I'm not doing due to time, but when you're designing with a team, I highly recommend is don't leave your layers naming as layer 1 and your rectangle as rectangle. It's going to be super hard for the second person to look at it. Trust me. I've had files that are like 50, 60 layers and all of them are compound path. Time consuming. So just be careful when you're working with someone else. They won't like it either. Now that we have, next thing we're going to create are the circles. So what we're going to do is go back to our rectangle tool, right click to change it and make it into a circle tool. Then we're going to zoom out a little because I want to be able to see what I'm making. Now I'm going to put it in the side. So I'm just going to move my screen to the left, put it in the side. That's just a habit I like to do, just so I don't interfere with my actual work. But feel free to put it on top of the work if you like. Then I'm going to hold shift and make a perfect circle because we know how hard it is to draw perfect circles. Then just for ease of visibility, I'm just going to swap the circle to a stroke. This is important for us to see something later on, and I'll just increase the width a little bit just so it's easier to on the eyes. All right, now that we have our circle with the stroke right here, it is now beginning the next step. So what we're going to do is make another circle by clicking on it and do Control C, which is copy, Control V, which is paste. What I'm going to do is now decrease the size of the circle by about 25%. So let's say somewhere around here. And then now that I have one circle, I am going to align it to the top. I've seen various techniques used to make these icons, but this one is the simplest that I've found. So I'm going to move this, align it to the top. What you want to do is make sure that it's centered and right at the top. You can also use these buttons to help align it, but what I recommend the best is just doing the guidelines. The most important is getting it to the top, mainly because if not, then one of the steps future on will be very difficult. Don't believe it's centered properly. Just move it right here. There you go. And then we're just going to copy the circle, paste it in the bottom. You know it's centered properly when there's a nice T shape, like that. Okay, now it looks good. Depending on the size of the circle, we can see the size of the shape that we're making. So it might be a little bit difficult for you to see it right now, but you can kind of see the 3D shape forming right here, where this is the top part inside the ring, and then this is the outside part of the ring. What we're going to do with this is we're going to click and drag everything here. And then go to this square right here, Pathfinder. If you can't find it, you can always go to Windows, and it should be right here, Pathfinder. You can just open it up and it'll pop up. Pathfinder is useful because what it does is whatever you have selected, it helps you do special effects to it. Or basically, it helps you combine them or separate them based on how are they intersecting with each other. As well as a few other things like minus the front, only do it by intersections, exclusions, etc. Most of the time, I've seen most designers use unite and divide, but feel free to play around with the other options. For us, we'll be doing divide. So I'm going to click on the divide. It did generate a few weird shapes, but that's because it's set up on the stroke. So now that I have a divide, all right, seems that it's separating correctly. You'll see that each individual part of the shape is its own grouping. See right here? I can drag it around. But I don't want to do that. I'm going to combine a few of them, and I'm going to remove the middle part after I do the next step, which is ungrouping, because right now they're all stuck in one. How did I move it individually? Well, I jumped in and clicked on it. So like going into that layer right there by double clicking it. I could remove the pieces individually, but that does get time consuming. So what I would just recommend is clicking on it, ungroup, bam, you're clean. Then take the piece that we don't want, which is the middle. And now we have these few pieces right here. What we're going to do with these few pieces is we're going to combine the bottom two right here, unite them into one, put them together. All is one. And then bring the top two together by clicking on them and then unite like this. Now you kind of see a shape going around where this goes into here and this goes into here. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply that lovely gradient that we got earlier. Now the cool thing about the eyedrop tool is that it actually keeps the stroke settings and the color. So if I do it here, notice how my stroke is pink, right? It's not going to change the stroke to the gradient. What it's going to do is change the color like this. It does get annoying when you're doing something that's stroke only, but it's useful to know. Then what we're going to do, click here, click it like this. Now, we notice that there are two lines right here, so we're going to get rid of them. Because they're relics from the division phase. So click, zoom out. And then finally, what we're going to do is, I mean, this doesn't look too bad itself, but it's not exactly the design we're looking for. We want this to be intersecting the other way. So we click on the shape, go back to the gradient, and go to, I believe it was 180. So it loops in like that. And I realized the gradient is not set properly. It's supposed to be reversed. So what I'm going to do is flip it around like this. And then paint this over with the eyedropper tool. And there we go. The yellow is a little bit, the pink is a little bit too strong. So what I'm going to do is drag this over here and adjust the gradient accordingly so that it looks much more clear. Sometimes you may have to click and make sure that you're selecting the right thing, or else it's not going to take effect. It does get a little bit annoying at times. Make it a darker magenta just to make the colors blend more equivalently. And there we go. Got the first ring. So I actually like it more neon. Let me reselect that. Part of the art process is just debating which color you want to use. It's the hardest thing in the world, trust me. Don't underestimate colors. Alrighty, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna Control G for grouping it. Control G to group it. And once we're grouping it, let's create the first thing, a stop button. Stop is represented by a square. So what we're going to do is now click here, click on the rectangle tool, and build a little square. And then we're going to convert this gradient to a stroke and increase the stroke size to something like 9%, maybe 10, to make sure that it matches the sizing of the shape. Maybe it's a little too big, the rectangle. Let's shrink it down a little by holding Shift and then dragging the corner. Shift helps you keep the shape uniform. If you're not doing it uniform, you don't have to hold Shift. So let's put it somewhere here, like in the center, and maybe increase it a little bit more. There we go. All right, now we have the stop, but it doesn't look great. It's not as playful. It gives a more professional vibe. So how do we make it more playful? Well, these little corners at the edge of the rectangles help you round the edges. So if we round the edges a little bit, it gives us a more friendly vibe. And let's increase the stroke a little bit more. It doesn't seem like it's enough. Put it to 20. There you go. That's big enough. And there you go. We have our first shape right here. Now, what I recommend you do is once you're done with this, go to the object tool and click on expand, so that your line, your stroke is saved as a shape itself. If you don't do this, let me just undo. I think it was at 20. I undid a little too much. If you don't do this and you decide, I want to resize my shape, it's not going to save the proportions. Notice how my poor little square turned into an eye now. Be careful. I've made that mistake so many times, and it really hurts to go back and fix it once you realize it's a little too late. So what you're going to do is expand to actually make the outline a shape. And then I'm going to click, wow, Control C, make another one. And then we're going to make a new rectangle for the pause button. Make a rectangle, shift, click like this. All right. Revert back the stroke. You can probably copy that stroke right here. It'll probably be around 20. Do it right here. Put them next to each other. And then round the edges a little. I should have done this before, so I'm going to click on this and delete it. Click on it again, Control C, Control V for copy paste. It should be the same rounded edges. It's not too much. Let me unround it a little bit. Like this. There you go. Control C, Control V again. There we go. Then what I'm going to do is click on both of them to make sure I'm selecting the two of them. You can also tell when it has this little square here. So that's something to keep in mind. You can also select these little circles here to force a selection instead of clicking on them individually, because sometimes you have objects on top of each other, making it quite difficult to click on it. So once I have these two, I'm going to click on them like this, and then make a compound back, and Control G for grouping. And now I have my pause button. So move it to the center, and we're almost there. We have one more to go. Do notes, like I mentioned earlier, we want to expand the shape so we don't lose it. And then, but do make sure before you expand everything that you're good with how it looks, because expanding is kind of final, as you can tell. You can't adjust the stroke afterwards. You'll have to manually do it with some mouse art. So moving on, we got one last circle to do. So Control C, Control V. Then you put it down. The last circle we want to do is a play button. What's a triangle? But they don't really have a triangle tool. You can kind of use it with the polygon, but I'd rather use it to teach you guys something else. And that something else is our almighty pen tool. So what the pen tool does is it helps you draw a line, whether that line be curved like this, or you can just draw straight lines like this. Basically draws shapes for you. And that's how you can do the more elaborate things when it comes with designs, other than using the divide and unite pathfinders. So I'm going to delete these two and create a nice little triangle with the pen tool. Click on the pen, click on a point, then drag our first line. I'm not holding shift because I do not want to make a curved line. I just want a straight line for my triangle. So I'm going to click here, then drag it down and create here. My triangle kind of looks wonky. I want it to be more even. So what I can do is I can use the direct selection tool, which is this white arrow here. Click on it and drag the individual point directly. This. If you use the black one, you'll do the object itself. But if you do the white one, you do each point of the object. And then what I'm going to do is curve it a little. So let's say like this. And convert it to a stroke. Stroke as in 20 right here. There we go. We've got our little triangle. And it's on the opposite direction. So I can always go to Object and go to Transform, Rotate. Rotate because 90? No, it was 180. Whoops. We go back here. Transform, Rotate. 180. There you go. And that'll be on the other side. Now, there's one thing to keep in mind when you're rotating an object. You can also save that transformation here. So let's say you have to do the same transformation for a long period of time. You can just click on clicking on this button. Do note that if you make another transformation afterwards, you can't do this feature. So be careful. And then I'm gonna put this triangle here. It's a little too big, so I'm gonna go expand it. Put my play button right here. And flip. That seems to be a glitch. All right. And there we go, our play button. I do realize that this is not uniform, so I'm just going to rotate this the other way so that we have the gradient going the same direction. A key thing to keep in mind when you're doing gradient works is that you want your gradients to be uniform. It's a little bit weird and uneven, kind of stops you in your tracks. If your gradient just suddenly goes from left to right, then right to left here like this, and then left to right again. So keep it uniform. Then what we're going to do is go for each circle, group them like that. Go for each circle, group them. Go for each circle, group them. Control G all the way. And we're going to have our icons. And then we're going to resize them. And like this. Here. Actually, you could just size them as a group as well. So you could click and drag like this. And then shrink it like this. Now. 1, 2, 3. Let's make them a little bit smaller. You see how they keep their shape as we click and drag these icons here? So then what we're going to do is put it down and spend some time reorganizing these. Just like that, we have our logo, as well as 3 icons that we can use in our design. And that is pretty much it. Since we have time, I might as well take it to teach you guys a little bit of how SVG saving and artboards work. So if you put things in an artboard, we can click on here and then click on the plus right here to create a new artboard. And what that does is it creates the size of the artboard. Just making a new artboard does not necessarily mean it's in the same layer. It's in the different layer. They might be in the same layer, so do be careful on that one fact. What we can do with the artboard then is we can click on it, we can rename it. This is important when it comes with saving artboards, because if you save things as artboards, it'll be called artboard 1, artboard 2. That's not the most descriptive name. So we can do it icon 1, for example. And this is our second artboard. This is something important later on to keep in mind. Let's put it, let's say somewhere around here, a little square. And then, oops, clicked on the wrong one. The artboard tool right here. Click on it, Control C, Control V, Control V. So we have 3 icons that are white. So what we could do is we could drag our icons right here. Oh, stretch it a little bit bigger. So let's just do it with all of them because we're going to need to do it anyway. And move them properly into the artboard. So we click here, put them in the artboard. You can click on the buttons right here to make it easier to align, because it's easier to make a machine do it than just to drag it yourself. But sometimes because you're in the feel, you might just do it anyways by habit. Like this. And there we go. We have 3 icons. So what we're going to do is click on the export as, and then when you do the export options, it'll have the file name. So this is the main name we have. So this would be, we can call it icons. And then I have it as a PNG, but I want it as SVGs. And then we can use artboards, and each artboard itself is a separate file. That's the importance of artboard. Now, I don't really want to save the graphic fund, so I'm just going to do a range and do it from 2 to 4, which is why the artboard number is important. And then export. Then they'll give you a few options. My rule of thumb is unless I'm trying to do something that I want to modify directly, I'll just leave it as it is. Then I'll click OK. You can also save these as PNGs if you're interested. So you can do export The SVGs, look at them. See, icons, icon 1, icons. I think I kept the name as icon 1. Whoops. It keeps the name here. So don't do like me where I just called it icon 1. Can't tell the difference then. And it'll be all saved like that. Alrighty. So we'll go back to the presentation now, shall we? We have completed our tutorial. Thank you everyone for listening. I have 20 minutes left, so I'm free to take any questions you have, whether that be related to vector arts on their own designs or need to repeat a few steps. So feel free to ask away as I take a quick water break. All right, so since there aren't any questions at the moment, I guess I can mention a few concepts that I think are important if you want to. Oh, what are some beginner mistakes when creating vector art? That's actually a pretty good question. So one of the key mistakes that I've seen when it comes with vector art is messy line work. Because a lot of the line work is done, let me go back, is done through the path tool at times. When you do the path tool, there are times that what you create isn't exactly aligned. Like this is a perfect triangle. This is not a perfect triangle, and you might miss it. Or the curve, or when you're doing curves. Like, let me see if I can make this into a curve. Give me a second. Click here. Click here. Click here. When you're doing curves, especially if it's like a wave, the art will have increased here, then decrease here. Then when you do a third wave, so let me put a second point here. There's a little bump that's going to be really hard to see. Do something like this. Do it like a curve. Sometimes this little bump here gets noticeable when you create larger pictures, mainly because a lot of people like to use a lot of points, anchor points, because the anchor points help you resize and reshape. So what I recommend to do is when you're creating art with vectors or just simple shapes, try to be careful with the amount of anchors you're using because you don't want to use too much of them. Another one that I've seen is when it comes with shading. So vector art, I wouldn't say art is important, but I do say that the concept of shading should be something you understand, especially if you're trying to create something in a 3D scale, since light and shadows do help make an object appear to be more closer in your perspective. And if you mess that up, it's going to be noticeable. And another one I've seen is color usage. So especially when it comes with gradients. Right now I'm using a gradient that looks fairly well. You go from the purple to the pink, but I've seen some pretty nasty gradients out there. So let's say like we put a green to, let me see. That's an okay one. This one looks nice. Do you see the little brown here? It kind of looks off. Then we go here. Unless you're trying to create a specific type of funky style, be careful of how you're doing your gradients, as not all gradients are created equal. So I can show you a few common examples right here. Purple and red. Let's do green and blue. That one's a nice one. I always love that color combination. You can see the difference. It's basically based on the position of the color wheel since you're trying to put one color to another color. So be careful which combinations you're using. There's some pretty nasty ones out there. I've had an Illustrator crash on my computer plenty of times, but the one that crashes mine the most is Photoshop. Photoshop's pretty bulky. Okay. Any more questions? Well, people are. No worries. If you have any other questions later on, don't feel free to ask on the Discord. I'm there to answer. Unless it's like 5 a.m. at night. That might be a little bit difficult here. Let's see. Another mistake I've seen people do with vector art is they, not in vector art, but in design in general, is they don't pay attention to their color mode, which I believe is in document color mode. If, like I mentioned earlier, if you're doing print works, keep it at CMYK. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to have when you print it out, it's not going to look the same as what you see on the screen. What you see on the screen is not reflective of what you're going to get as the final work. The same thing, if you're trying to build something that is on the digital space, don't use CMYK. Use RGB, because CMYK will dull your colors and won't be as vibrant as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see. Another thing is, if you don't have the round edges option, sometimes it might not appear. What I recommend is you can go to Effect, and then let's see, it was in Stylize, I believe, round corners. That will round your corners plenty already. You did an extra round upon a round. So that's another way to round your corners if you don't see that little button or that the button is super difficult to reach. And you can make some pretty cool things with gradients. A common trend I've seen is that gradients have been used as an alternative to shading. So instead of basically copying a layer and let me just ungroup this. So delete, make this black here. And then this would be transparent, so 0%. Oh, that's on the black. Whoops. 0% on the pink, put it on top of the black. Instead of doing it like that, you see that there's a little bit of a shadow here. I've seen people use gradients as an alternative to that technique. To be fair, this transparent moon looks pretty nice. So that's another route you can take. It's not important to know how to draw, but it is important to understand the concepts. So which colors look well with each other? What kind of form does the object you're trying to create take? And most importantly, how light and shadow interacts with the object. Now, there are some types of vector arts that are minimalistic in style, meaning they don't use shading at all. Minimalism is keeping things simple. So, for example, a good one I like to do is go up, make a circle. Let me make this red. Put it at 10. And then I'm going to make a little stick here. Make it a brownish color. I wonder if you could tell me what this is, just based on the two simple shapes I've made. It kind of looks like an apple, doesn't it? That's the idea of minimalism. It's keeping things simple just so you can retain the shape. And you could get some creative designs out of this. I've seen an orange done kind of like this because it keeps the form of the object. And once it does that, you're able to tell what the object is based on the form. And that's something I feel is important to understand. So put a little circle like this, put another one. There you go. Our little orange right here. Kind of cute. So when you're trying to create something like a logo, for example, instead of trying to overcomplicate it with gradients and such, maybe one thing you can take a look back is go a step backwards and see what makes this object really what you're looking for. So what makes an orange an orange? An orange color probably helps. Doing a little circle, I've seen oranges designed with a few leaves on the top to represent the stem, so maybe you can do that kind of thing. Alrighty. And then in terms of free resources, there are a few out there. So what I recommend is UI gradients for gradients, coolers for ideas of how to make which color combinations to use for your project, and then Adobe Colors if you have that as well. There's also a few illustration resources such as Unsplash. No, wait, not Unsplash, Undraw, and then Unsplash is for photos. One of the cool features about Illustrator is the image trace functionality. So I go to Unsplash, pick an image, what's the first one that comes up? This one. Click on it, click on image trace, and it will vectorize that image for me. Now, obviously, it's not the most nice looking, so I'm going to change it to another fidelity, for example. And there you go. It looks like the image, but it's actually made out of vectors, and this is actually scalable. Do be careful when you're doing this, though, because A, attribution is important, and B, it is not the cleanest thing to edit. So if I expand this, you can see how messy the lines are. So, mirror question. Oh, so in terms of inspiration, one of my favorite things to do is look at what are other people doing, and try to build something using that style. So, for example, we go on to Behance. Behance or Dribble. You can look at what graphic design trends are popping up. How are people doing their designs? If you want to keep something more like to certain templates, for example, you can always Google something like social media templates to see what kind of ideas can I get by looking at these. Oh, I can take this, or you go on logo designs, for example. You'd be like, okay, let me see, let me get something simple. Oh, that's a creative way. They use a gradient to convey a letter right here, a person. They keep the shape of the person here. Or we go, here they use black and white as their logos, which works as well. There's various varieties right here. This one's very simple as well. Just use that and try to create something with what I've seen. In terms of art block, so I like to follow this advice, which is just do it. If you have an art block, create something. It doesn't matter how good it is. You don't want to create something good. You just want to create it. And then once you get into the habit of creating things over and over, it doesn't have to be something beautiful or complex. It could literally just be, today, I'm going to go on Adobe Illustrator and I'm going to create a text logo that's black and white. So something like, let's see, we'll use this font. Cool foods. Put cool right here. And then foods right here. That's a logo. That's a design. That's it for today. Next day. And then you just keep on doing it. Maybe the next day you want to try using colors and make something cool out of the colors. And then you slowly scale back up there. Art block is a thing that happens, but you will slowly bypass it if you don't give up and keep on working. It's the best way to put it. I hope that helps. I do know art block is a common problem. I struggle with times, and just the motivation doesn't come when you need it the most. But when those cases come, that's when you really have to push yourself. If I want to design, I've got to do it. And also looking at inspiration, maybe follow a few YouTube tutorials. There are plenty out there that you could just follow step by step so you can learn one or two new tricks. I highly recommend YouTube. I think the circle technique came from a YouTube video as well. Since there's 7 minutes left, if there isn't any more questions, I shall end the workshop early and give you guys 7 minutes of your night, so maybe we can get some good set eyes from that. As mentioned earlier, if you have any further questions, feel free to ask them on the Discord, and I'll take my time. I'll answer them when I see them. You can also ping me, and I'll take a look then. Another thing to note is that you guys are building a project for a hackathon. While vector art may not be your first most priority, I hope that this helps you just see an idea of how to create something you can utilize as an image in your project. If not, maybe just helps teach you a bit about how color interacts with each other, or how you can use lines and simple shapes to just make something stand out. Once again, thank you all for listening, and I hope you guys have a great evening. Good luck on your projects. I look forward to seeing what you guys can create. Thank you.